Welcome on in to this edition of the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast. Today is Thursday, August 18th. Today, we're putting our chips to the table. We're showing our cards. We are talking about our best ball exposure, talking about the players that we are most counting on to carry our best ball success for the upcoming season. So, big best ball episode coming your way right now. Let's start the show. Welcome on in. This is the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast brought to you by our friends over at Dynasty Owner. I'm your host, John McKechnie, joined as always by Mario Puig. Mario, we are going to be discussing players that we have a lot of exposure to in best ball. We're going to be mostly working off of your list. I don't have quite as expansive of a best ball portfolio on Underdog specifically as you might. So we are going to get into your percentages, get into some big name players that you have a lot of, and then maybe some players, on the other end that you have mostly stayed away from that are going high in drafts. But I kind of wanted to lead things off before we get into all of that with some discussion on some interesting backfield situations. I want to kick things off in Kansas City. What's the latest there as it pertains to Ronald Jones? How much Isaiah Pacheco hype are you willing to buy at the new ADP? I just scooped him on DraftKings this morning at around pick 150. I felt like that wasn't too aggressive. I feel like it's gone higher for him. So I didn't feel terrible about jumping on the hype at that particular point. But as it goes with this Kansas City running back room, what are your thoughts right now and how are you playing it in best ball?
Well, I might have already played it pretty wrong. Granted, it was in the 11th, 12th, sometimes even I feel like 13th round. I've got quite a bit of Ronald Jones exposure on Underdog, and the basic reason I did was because he was a cheap presumed backup to Clyde Edwards-Helaire in what we would otherwise expect to be one of the highest scoring offenses. So that's pretty much all that I really needed as the basis for targeting at that price. And of course, the apparently false premise there is that he would be the backup because I still can't really believe it could possibly be true, but it appears to be some possibility that they just cut him, in which case I feel like there must be some sort of like off the field issue, and in which case I don't know why no one has reported on what it is. It must be out there. Like, it's the Chiefs. They can't keep a secret like that, I would imagine, if we have any sort of enterprising local reporters. But maybe, I mean, there's also cases of teams media sitting on information for whatever reason, and I don't know if that's what's happening here. But the Chiefs paid they paid him what would be I think $1.5 million contract this year just for 1 year, with $750,000 of that fully guaranteed, which is to say, if they cut him, they're still paying him $750,000 in addition to whatever they were paying to get him into training camp and whatever else. And $750,000 is just under 3/4 of the cost that it would have took to just re-sign Darrell Williams to a 1-year contract. And if they're cutting Jones, if they're so alienated by him and so discouraged from what he's showing them in these brief practices, then they would prefer Darrell Williams in hindsight. And it's like, how would you not know going into this what kind of player Ronald Jones is? And it's hard to imagine them, complaining about his running. It would have to be about passing down stuff. I thought it made enough sense for them to sign him anyway and just say, like, well, you're just not going to play on passing downs. You're gonna be out there and you're gonna get carries when we're running out the clock. You're gonna be out there for short yardage or whatever else. You're basically gonna pick up the slack that Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 5'7", 204 with 2 years in a row of injury troubles might not be able to pick up, which is to say a lot. It's like Clyde Edwards-Helaire is too small, more or less. He's not exactly fast to make up for it. He's quick and he's springy, but he's not fast. He's never going to pull away from defenders. You need to have him playing in space because he's never going to like pull away from a defense to create his own. I feel like it makes clear sense for them to turn Clyde Edwards-Helaire into more of a pass catching back, less of a carry specialist. And then that's exactly what he looked like out of LSU. He was like a pass catching guy, and they haven't used him that way yet. So I thought it made enough sense. especially with Tyreek Hill gone, especially with the two high skirts that the Chiefs offense always sees. Like, why not just have Clyde Edwards-Helaire do all the pass catching instead of giving the pass catching freebies to Darrell Williams and Jerick McKinnon? Why not give it to the running back who was actually a good pass catcher in college and that you spent a first round pick on? And then if you're giving him less work as a runner to keep him from getting hurt, have some Ronald Jones type hanging around to pick up the slack, because it's easy mode in the Chiefs offense. So with that point noted, the easy mode applies to the benefit of Isaiah Pacheco too. So I happen to be pretty high on Pacheco. I think he's clearly not a Darwin Thompson case, like the Darwin Thompson saga for people who are new.
That's classic. And hook, line, and sinker.
Well, you were in when he was in like the pro day time, when people literally did not know who he was, and you were saying like, hey, this guy at Utah State might be kind of interesting. But then by the time training camp got around, because of training camp reports about like Darwin Thompson's getting first team reps, he was going in like the 10th round in drafts, and I don't know if he had 150 yards that year. So I'm leery of a case like that too. But for whatever it's worth, I was saying at the time, like, this Darwin Thompson stuff is nonsense. He's probably a fine. I thought he was going to be a good like third down guy or something, which also turned out to be too optimistic. And yet I was pretty low on him relative to some people. With that noted, I think Pacheco is clearly a different case. Like, I think Pacheco really is a player who could produce from scrimmage in the Chiefs offense, so even if he can't in some others.
So expound on that a little bit, because I think, I've seen anytime that there's a hype case, there's always pushback, right? And I think a lot of people will just look at Pacheco's production from Rutgers and be like, what's the point? Why?
I think it's a lot of people just simply who are bitter about falling for the Darwin Thompson thing the first time, especially people who didn't actually ever find out who Darwin Thompson was. Like, you had reasons. A lot of people didn't. A lot of people just heard about him and went like, oh, gotta jump to the news because it told me to. And so they just started scrambling for Darwin Thompson, not knowing the first thing about him, not knowing, the difference between Utah and Utah State, not knowing how big he was, not knowing how fast he was, not knowing how he produced at Utah State, nothing. And they still just went head first. And when you approach these things as that kind of person might, then when you see Isaiah Pacheco case come along, you don't necessarily think about how you might have been wrong the first time. You're just experiencing it as Darwin Thompson again, and you like remember from putting your hand on the stove, oh, bad. So you just kind of blurt it out, and you don't learn anything from either case. But Isaiah Pacheco is very different. Thompson was like 5'8", 198 or something, and basically ran a 4.6. He was quick, and he had some interesting jumps and whatever, and he was a really good college player, certainly. And even now, he's had a fine career. I mean, he's been getting NFL paychecks, be it on practice squads or as a backup or whatever, for like 5 years now. So he's certainly no bum. But the reason that he was replaceable ultimately for the Chiefs is that he was a small guy who wasn't fast and didn't actually break tackles. Like, he had some jukes, and that's about it. And you don't really need jukes in a Pat Mahomes offense as much as you need the speed to exploit the space that he earns from the safeties and the linebackers. And that's why, like, you get guys like Spencer Ware, Damian Williams in there, like very basically functional players putting up huge numbers because it's easy mode as long as you can exploit the space that Patrick Mahomes earns for you. And Isaiah Pacheco, whatever else might be true about him, let's just say he runs with horse blinders. Like, he barely even knows where he's going when he's running. In this offense, it doesn't necessarily matter because there's a pretty good offensive line to boot. I mean, it's not just that the safeties are playing back and that the linebackers are terrified about getting, they're worried about where Kelsey is and if he's going to cross, the field to where they're supposed to be if it's a coverage call. They have to worry about stuff like that. And by the time that they might figure out it's a run play rather than some kind of Kelsey sort of thing, it's already full speed Pacheco at them. And he's maybe got like 3 yards of space before he's getting into your range. And he's running that 4.45. And he's not big exactly. He's only like 216, 215. But I think once you're over 215 and if you're under, the 4.5, you can be a pretty explosive runner. And the thing about Pacheco that's memorable with him is he's a very high motor guy, and it's becoming a trope with him already. But it's one of those things that is true. I mean, it's not just people talking about grit or whatever. You watch Pacheco; he runs like he's crazy, basically. So if he's fast and if he's got anchor to work with, which he does, and if he's running at a hot motor, if he's always at 110%, and it's also an easy mode scenario, this is a player who will produce, I think, if he's on the field. But I still can't believe that they would get rid of Ronald Jones, because Pacheco was taken with the third to last pick of the regulation selections in the 7th round. If the Chiefs really are going to cut Ronald Jones because they have Pacheco, like in light of what a revelation Pacheco has been, shouldn't they feel a little unsafe? Shouldn't they feel like they dodged a bullet barely and like maybe aren't even sure that they didn't get hit yet, despite walking away from this scenario where they have a 5'7", 204 back who can't really take more than 12 carries a game without getting hurt at a time when they need to run more and better than ever with Tyreek Hill gone and with these too high looks from defenses. If they hadn't taken Pacheco with that third to last pick in the regulation selections of the 7th round, would they have still cut Ronald Jones, or would they have just gone into the year with Ronald Jones as this otherwise best option that they are in this timeline declaring non-viable for their roster entirely? That seems like a lot of it would just be a terrible job on the part of the Chiefs front office, which it could be that's it. It could just be like they've just done a straight up horrible job, but it's a memorable instance of incompetence. If so, it's like this is as bad as of an off-season setup that any GM has arranged for any of the teams in the past 5 years, kind of a level of failure, because they need to be able to run the ball. And if it's just Edwards-Helaire out there, they are basically 12 carries away from the guy that they almost didn't pick in the draft at all, who's a rookie, 7th round pick, taking up all of the backfield snaps, because McKinnon can't run. I mean, I know people saw a wild card game against the worst run defense in the league, and think McKinnon's good now, even though he was bad for 5+ years or whatever before that. But it's just Edwards-Helaire and Pacheco who can run if they cut Ronald Jones. And Edwards-Helaire is super injury prone. The other guy they almost didn't pick at all. So I don't know. If at the very least they should be trying to trade for a running back if they can't keep Jones.
Okay. Well, I think you pretty much covered all of that from pretty much every angle. But no, the people needed to know. Julia, frequent viewer, does want to know, how is Pacheco's skill set different than CEH? Well, CEH is a smaller back, like 5'8", like just over 200 pounds.
He's patient.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the other edge of the sword with Pacheco is he's always shot out of a cannon. He's not like a pacing runner.
Right, exactly. And CEH, a better pass catching guy. Pacheco can take that dirty work, and that role is up for grabs. And it seems like right now, bad process aside, that Pacheco seems to be kind of ahead of Ronald Jones at this point, and Ronald Jones
and McKinnon apparently.
Yeah.
So we'll see. They could just keep 4 running backs, but it looks very weird to me at the moment. So needless to say, I am not really targeting Ronald Jones at this point, with plenty of exposure already at a higher price than he goes for now.
Right. Yeah. So leave that be for now. Are you in on Pacheco at where he's going currently?
No, I like him, but I do worry. Like, even if they cut Jones, what if it could be as simple as like Buffalo cutting Duke Johnson and the Chiefs claiming Duke Johnson, which, by the way, would be a really like intense truther scenario for truther like experiment for me, because I think in that scenario Duke Johnson might just take over that entire backfield, because unlike McKinnon, Duke Johnson can play running back. But yeah, it's just even if Jones is gone, anybody they replace him with could be a problem for a 7th round pick rookie. I mean, it's just, especially when you're talking like the 11th, 12th round. At that point, it's like I need Clyde Edwards-Helaire to get hurt. And if he does, then even another running back added, there's still room for Pacheco to produce. But yeah, I haven't been able to. I would have maybe took him in like the 14th or 15th if he was available now. But even if Jones is gone, I think they have to add somebody else. Like they will be forced to, because Edwards-Helaire will break down again, if nothing else.
Yeah, they absolutely need some form of depth, and they don't. They're kind of.
They're just shrugging at the whole question of how are you replacing Tyreek Hill? And if they don't have Jones as part of that answer, then their answer is, well, we don't know, hoping. We're just vibing through it.
We have Patrick Mahomes. Maybe that will be good enough. Let's see. We got a question from Sam. Cam Akers or Elijah Mitchell, both a little injury prone, better draft targets in PPR.
I really don't know. I mean,
I have zero Cam Akers.
What's that?
I have zero Cam Akers, and I have a lot of Elijah Mitchell.
Cam Akers, but he's to me kind of like the Ezekiel Elliott type, where it's not that I hate him or anything. It's just there's other players I like more in that range, so I don't pick him. Whereas Elijah Mitchell, I would like to target even more going forward, because he's just it's a good 2+ rounds cheaper. So it's kind of just, a punt solution to the question, I guess, rather than confronting it. But if for the same price, I think I'd, especially if it's a trade league, I'd rather just have Akers, because I can't imagine most people preferring Mitchell like I might. But I think one thing about Mitchell that's important to understand is people are omitting in his broader narrative the point that he is going to be the passing down back for the 49ers. Whereas last year he was basically just run package player, and he was getting overworked as 20 plus carries a game. I think what they want to do this year is, yes, get his carry count lower, but specifically because they're going to take away some of those short yardage carries, those thankless short yardage carries, not even like the high production ones, and then replacing them with snaps that went to JaMychal Hasty in the passing game last year, because Hasty is just a total drain on the offense. But he was their main passing down guy when it wasn't the fullback. So Mitchell, I think, could catch 50 passes this year, and everyone acts like it's just not possible for him because he didn't happen to catch many passes as a rookie. He caught a lot of passes at Lafayette. He can do it, and he's going to this year.
It's called Louisiana now.
Oh, sorry, Louisiana University.
Yeah, it's kind of bold of them to just like claim that they are Louisiana now.
If I was Monroe, I'd just go and seize their facilities and say, no, we are.
No, yeah, you kind of have to. I mean, they're encroaching on their turf. Although, would you sooner mess with a Warhawk or a Raging Cajun? Probably
you got with the Hawks. You got the aerial advantage, and you can swarm. A Cajun might be prone to wander out into the waters alone to look for crawfish, and you just ambush him.
Good point.
Raging or not, he's in the water alone.
But the Cajuns, they got that dog in them, so I don't know. It's a tricky debate. We'll get into that on the Patreon pod. Going back to Akers for one more second here. Have you noticed any fluctuation in Akers' ADP over the last month? Because we've seen.
I haven't paid good attention, but I haven't really noticed it, I guess.
He's someone that I just tend to gloss over, as that like late third, early fourth kind of starts to unfold, and I've leveraged myself in a different direction away from Akers generally. Let's go ahead and before we get on over to more of this backfield discussion, we're going to get to the Chargers in a second. A message from our friends over at Blue Wire. And okay, we're back. So there, Isaiah Spiller is someone who I think a lot of people were interested in. We've kind of been over it during the pre-draft process, a little bit overhyped, but then he lands in a good spot at a good point in the draft. A fourth round pick going to the Chargers, being that backup running back to Austin Eckler after they were kind of unable to get much in the way of returns out of Josh Kelly and Larry Roundtree over the last couple of years. Do love Larry Roundtree, but probably not actually that good. But things have maybe soured a little bit on Kelly, or I'm sorry, on Spiller, and maybe Kelly is going to be that next man up to take not necessarily the work off of Eckler's plate, but give him a breather. Yeah.
So along with Ronald Jones, I have exactly 1/3 exposure of Isaiah Spiller on Underdog. So these two would arguably be my biggest liabilities. Aside from whatever other stupid decisions I've made, these two are like in the meantime looking kind of sketchy. And I think it can both be true that Daniel Popper, the beat writer for, I believe, The Athletic, is the one who put this theory forward. And I have no doubt that he's like an astute practice observer and that he knows enough about football to know what's going on in the practice. And he's observed that Kelly generally has gotten what has it been? It's things like they get 3 reps in a row as a unit. The first rep goes to Eckler, the second goes to Kelly, the third goes to Spiller most of the time. This is something that has been fluctuating over the course of training camp. So it's one of those things like I don't know if we know it's going to be the case next week, and we don't know if it matters in the meantime or then if it does change. It could just be kind of like ceremonial kind of walkthrough kind of stuff because it's hard to know exactly what each team is doing on a case-by-case basis. You don't know the kind of mind games coaches are playing, especially with rookies. It's a very common football thing to do this thing where you're like, you got to earn your stripes, you got to earn your stickers, rookie. You'll get out there when you earn it. But for now, you're carrying the shoulder pads. and you're fourth string. You're not even going to make the team, rookie. Just total like bluffs. Coaches do that all the time with guys that they know they're going to be riding in the second half of the year. Like Bill Parcells, for instance, was like the guy as far as that goes. And he's maybe the most influential single coach of the past like 30 years in the NFL. So a rookie being held behind a terrible, clearly useless veteran in a practice with zero stakes is something that has happened a lot of times to no consequence. And even if the thing that's crucial with Spiller, and the reason I'm not nearly as anxious about my Spiller exposure as I am my Ronald Jones exposure, is that A, he's going to make the freaking team. There's no question about that. And B, let the Chargers give this Josh Kelly thing a try if they really want to. I don't think there's any reason to truly believe that they do. I don't think they're the resolve to anything necessarily, but even if they really are they're just like, oh, Josh Kelly's just so reliable in practice. How could we ever put him behind a rookie, this unknown rookie? Like, well, Josh Kelly has logged 144 carries in the NFL. They've gone for 456 yards. That's less than 3.2 yards per carry, John. I don't know the last time a running back got to 150 carries in the NFL while averaging less than 3.2 yards per carry. I think Kelly's going to get 6 more career carries. I'm not saying he's going to get cut before he gets 6 carries. But if the Chargers want to try this out, would anyone like to guess how this turns out for them? Like, it's not going to work. They will turn to Spiller out of necessity. And it's also possible that with 3 weeks to go before the season actually starts, we could just get to practice on Wednesday of next week, and it's like Kelly, is either in the spot that Spiller was last week, or just some other sort of thing that just totally overrules whatever significance we thought last week's practice reports had. So if the same report is happening the week leading up to week 1, maybe I'm going to start worrying about Spiller. But even as a former Spiller skeptic, the idea that Josh Kelly is going to get in his way for more than 20 snaps seems completely impossible to me.
Okay, yeah. So that's one to maybe buy the dip if there is one on Spiller, and then
I think you should feel safe buying the dip on Spiller, assuming you don't have like too much exposure already, like I do.
Okay, yeah. I was in consideration for him doing a best ball this morning, but I ended up going in a different direction. I forget exactly who I scooped at that particular point. It might have been someone that everyone is soured on, and it's not Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I didn't feel good about this pick myself, but I took Miles Sanders like the ninth round.
In the ninth? Oh, okay.
Something like that.
So I think he was usually going in like the 7th before, and I wasn't picking him there. But yeah, I don't even know what. Miles Sanders can definitely run. That's one thing about him. It's just kind of like, how much is there of that to do with Jalen Hurts running so much himself? But yeah, if Sanders, it'd be funny if Sanders got traded to the Chiefs or something like that. Like the Eagles don't really seem to have a use for him. I don't know why they don't try to move him. But if Sanders gets carries, he will produce. That's never really been a question with him.
Oh, all right. Well, I think he's like my third running back there. So, we'll see. We'll see. Before we get on over to our best ball portfolios, I got a message from our sponsors. Leading us off here is our friends over at Dynasty Owner. Do you love fantasy sports? Are you ready for a new challenge this year? Dynasty Owner is the new way to play fantasy football with real NFL salaries, adding the strategy of running an actual franchise. Dynasty Owner provides a unique and challenging experience that will test your skills as an owner and general manager. You will have complete control over your team's future. You can build through the draft, make trades, sign free agents, and manage your team's salary cap. Can you create a dynasty of champions? Sign up now at dynastyowner.com and use promo code ROTO5, that's ROTO5, to receive $5 off any new team. That's ROTO5 over there at Dynasty Owner. We also got a message from our friends over at Fantrax. Is there something you wish your fantasy league had, or features that are missing from your current leagues? Bonus scoring, custom schedules or playoffs, deeper team settings? Well, look no further, because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Join MLB All-Star Jock Peterson, who recently announced he's moving his fantasy football leagues to Fantrax. Fantrax is excited to announce the Fantrax Game Day Experience giveaway. Fantrax will be sending one lucky fantasy football league to a regular season NFL game of their choice, along with $6,000 towards travel and accommodations. All you have to do to enter the giveaway is to create or join a league on Fantrax. The more leagues you create and join, the more chances you have to win. There's a reason why fantasy players who try Fantrax make it the permanent home for all their fantasy leagues. Go to fantrax.com/rotowire and sign up today. All right, pushing onward, getting into the meat of today's episode after our opening discussion on some backfields out in the AFC West, particularly. Let's get into some players that you have some very high exposure to in best ball. I think these are, it's an interesting group. It kind of gives me, and you'll run this piece on the website a little bit later on this week and have it fleshed out in word form. But there's just a lot of players that I think are on this list that your average kind of casual player might be eschewing this year or just glossing over one way or the other. So guys that are going in the particular range that I'm talking about, Cordarrelle Patterson, Christian Kirk, and Rashad Penny. So you have the floor. I'd prefer if you open it up talking about Cordarrelle Patterson.
Yeah, so granted, he would be a little more conventionally valuable in full point PPR. On underdog, it's half point. So maybe that's kind of the tie-breaking, souring point for a lot of people who might otherwise consider Patterson, but I think he's still going too late. I often get him. I mean, I might have took him a couple times in the late 9th or something like, or maybe even early 9th. I don't know. I have no problem taking him anywhere in the first 7 rounds if I'm making personal rankings. But because he was always there in the 10th, I generally got him there, and sometimes even I think late 10th. So that's just strange to me because even if you don't think Patterson is very good, I happen to think he is, which is, I guess, some of the other disclaimer I should offer there. But even if you don't think he's good, the Falcons are committed to him, at least to start the year. And I don't know why that would not be the case, throughout the year, unless he got hurt, because the production was there to, I think, a pretty convincing extent. And they've been giving him basically OTAs off, training camp off. They're giving him the kind of rest that you do when you have a veteran running back that you basically are dependent on, when you're like, we don't really know what the hell we're going to do if this guy gets hurt, so we cannot let him get hurt. That's how they are handling Patterson right now. So it's one thing to say that you might think he's a flash in the pan, that last year's success was kind of just a fluke, but even if...
I mean, that's literally in his Twitter name. Isn't he like CFlash84?
Yeah, it's a weird thing too with the 84. Maybe that throws people off. Maybe they got bad nightmares about Ty Montgomery in Green Bay or something like that. Understandable enough, but the thing you got to understand with Patterson is that the production that he showed last year was not exactly. I know I keep going to the BABIP analogy in football, but I have to. People look at Patterson and they see the points per game, the fantasy points per game, and they think oh, well, that's going to come down. If he's an everyday player, that's coming down. His BABIP's 430, that's going to drop 120 points. It's coming down. He's going to regress. But when you look at his numbers, there's sooner reason to believe for actual growth in his yards per carry. I mean, the touchdowns might not be there quite as much. He had his yards per carry dragged down by a lot of short yardage red zone carries that don't really suit him, that might go to Damian Williams and Tyler Algier. However, he got hurt playing that way, and I think keeping him out of those high impact collisions will extend his the snap count that he can play over the full year, basically, and he will get more big plays if a bigger percentage of the carries that he does take are more between the 20s than within the red zone. So he had, for instance, 6 touchdowns on 153 carries last year at 4.0 yards per carry. He had no 40-yard carries though, and if he's trading off 2 or 3 of those 6 touchdowns in exchange for getting his yards per carry up to 4.8 or 5, I take that, especially if it means that it's less likely that he gets hurt for it. Meanwhile, as a pass catcher, I know there was that one big play that he had that kind of juiced it a little bit. So we might expect these 7.9 yards per target to drop to 6.5 or something like that. But even if so, for the kind of per snap target rate that he has, that ranks among the best in the league. So with Patterson, whatever other concerns people have, I think it's shaping up that his usage is going to be, the Atlanta Falcons version of what we see with Austin Eckler, the Chargers, Swift with the Lions. I think what ETN will prove to be with the Jaguars. And I think the skill and, decreased team offense capital are not enough to dictate the just difference in ADP between those players. Like Patterson is riskier, yes, but his upside is understated in the 10th round and his risk is overstated. I think he averaged more yards per snap, yards from scrimmage per snap than Austin Eckler did. It was 2.55 yards from scrimmage per snap from Patterson, and that's a very high number, especially for a guy who doesn't get many carries. Like when you're over 2.3, 2.4 yards from scrimmage per snap, you're generally talking about guys who are 18, 20 carry running backs. And Patterson, because it's easier to get a yard every snap when you're out there getting carries every snap you're out there. Like with passing plays, you're not getting a carry, which is automatic yardage, and you might not get the target because there's 4 or 5 guys running routes. The targets that you do get, you might only catch 3 out of 4, 4 out of 5, something like that. So for Patterson to have that 2.55 while getting so much of his work from scrimmage as a pass catcher shows that he was basically playing at a high level. It was not fake numbers. He was just playing really well, and now he's going into this year with the team dependent on him. So I think he has no meaningful risk in the 10th round, and I'm pretty glad to have 50% exposure, as reckless as it is.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't he going several rounds earlier than that, like way back earlier in draft season? Or
He might have
could I be
been. I
off
don't really
there?
remember.
But either way,
Similar. So I get him and, of course, Rashad Penny in the same range. I basically, when I wasn't taking one, I was taking the other. It's how I got to roughly 50-50 exposure between the two. I love Penny. Obviously, he's a very different sort of player than Patterson. You might even say he's sooner the opposite. The injury risk is more emphatic with Penny, and if he needs target, if he's not getting carries, he won't produce. With Patterson, if he's not getting carries, he can still produce. And Penny, admittedly, that's not really on the table. I think he could be okay as a pass catcher, but he's not going to make up for the lost rushing production as a pass catcher. So
is there going to be, sort of like what we've talked about with Kenneth Walker and the sort of non-applicable pass catching grade coming out of Michigan State? Do you envision this Seattle offense really using the running backs in the passing game much to begin with?
I don't know. I mean, they keep DJ Dallas around, and I know he was vaguely productive as a pass catcher last year, but I think that he just isn't very good personally, and I think they should try to get Dallas off the field to get, even if Penny is the clear starter, I think they should try to get Ken Walker prepped to take some of the targets from Dallas, because I think the Dallas targets were more just like what happens when the defense leaves him open and Russell Wilson takes just kind of the free play. They never really demonstrated volume or any sort of convincing threat with Dallas. So the more Dallas plays, the worse the Seattle offense looks to me. And
but that's an impressive feat. I think it's going to be one of the worst watches of any.
Yeah, the way they're going to play is ugly as hell, and they want to make the game short so that it comes more likely down to one play, because they might be lucky on one play. They're not going to be as lucky if they have to be lucky 10 plays in a row. So they want to run the ball a lot. Even if they're losing, they're going to be running the ball. I mean, I don't know why there's this just truism out there in fantasy football now. It's like, if your running back is on a losing team, he's never going to get carries. Have you ever seen a team with a quarterback so bad that they just run the ball even when they're losing? I have. The Seattle offense might be another one of those.
No, because like the other side of that argument would be like, why isn't Drew Lock way up your rankings if like they're going to be trailing by a lot every single game? Isn't he going to have all the pass attempts in the world?
People act like they love these new macro analyses that flatten all the outliers. So there's basically just this massive blob of dots and no real way to separate it all. But not everything works the same in every case. Like, yes, some teams abandon the run. Pete Carroll doesn't. It's as easy as that.
I love blobs of dots. And I went to an establishment in Deep Elm the other week called Dots. Good place if you're ever in the Dallas, Texas area. Moving forward, let's see. So we were also talking about Penny, Christian Kirk. So the kind of presumed wide receiver one there in Jacksonville. Is that just more an expression of trying to get get exposure to that number one target for Trevor Lawrence, who we expect to, take a step forward this coming season? Or is there, some added things when it comes to Kirk and in your analysis with him that makes you particularly confident to get a lot of shares?
I don't have any delusions about Kirk being like a 110 catch player or anything like that, but I think the fact is people have at least a couple false premises underlying their reasoning on him, which comes out to just kind of be wrong due to misunderstanding the kind of player he is. And I imagine what some people, even smart, I could imagine a lot of them not taking Kirk because he has a pretty low, modest at most, per snap target rate in his NFL career. And I think people just don't understand that he was playing out of position for at least that first year or two before Cliff Kingsbury got there. And then when Cliff Kingsbury got there, he still played outside until Larry Fitzgerald was gone. Last year in the slot, even finally playing the correct position, the correct alignment in the slot, they were using Kirk at depth that didn't really suit his skill set. They were still using him as a downfield receiver, the kind of routes that will better suit Marquise Brown, by the way, not to go off on too much of a tangent. But if you're running from the slot and you have Christian Kirk there, you want to have that average depth of target more around like 8, maybe 9 yards, not 10 plus yards, not running, 15-yard posts over and over and over. Kirk was a underneath yards after the catch monster in college, and he has not once been used in that capacity in the NFL. So I am making a leap of faith, assuming that the Jaguars are going to be the first ones to do it, that they're going to make him a slot, not specialist necessarily, but a heavy emphasis in the slot and heavy underneath emphasis rather than downfield emphasis. And people have completely lost sight of how Kirk is actually really good after the catch. He hasn't been able to show it in Arizona because they haven't set him up with after the catch looks. And the catches that he did get, it would tend to be like a safety's closing in on him because it's thrown through a tight window down the seam by Kyler Murray and a safety's closing in. So he doesn't do much after the catch because the defender's closing in on the catch point. But when you set him up in space, he's a menace after the catch. Christian Kirk was probably the best punt returner in NCAA history. No one remembers this. He has like 8 touchdowns or something on like 25 return attempts.
Yeah, his first game, true freshman against Arizona State, just absolutely took over. That was
averaged over 20 yards per punt return in his career. And it's like, that is a player who is good after the catch. You cannot be good, that good of a punt returner and be no threat in the open field. It's an absurd suggestion. So if the Jaguars just start to use him that way, then he will draw a higher per snap target count than the people who are basing, their models on drawing from these different alignments, different route depths, where he won't draw targets as fast. Now he's going to run a totally different game, and I don't know if many people are anticipating that. So I happen to think he's underrated as a player. I think Trevor Lawrence is underrated as a player. I think that it's under-acknowledged the target share that Kirk is going to get in this offense. And he, with all of that being the case in my mind, is going pretty late. You don't even really it's not like you have to bid high to get in on a fad player. He is not a fad player. People don't want him even now. You get him in like the 8th round. There's usually like 2 or 3 people at most in a draft looking to get him. You'll never have to take him far ahead of ADP. So I'm glad to get him on almost half of my teams.
So you mentioned the type of role and type of route tree depth of target that Kirk is going to have. Just like expounding a bit on this Jaguars offense. I mean, you do have Trevor Lawrence, has a great arm, obviously. Who is going to be the proverbial downfield guy in this offense? Is it Zay Jones?
I don't think they have one, and I don't know if they understand that. I don't know if they planned accordingly. I kind of doubt it. At least Balky didn't. I like Doug Peterson, and I think Doug Peterson is gonna. He's a pragmatic guy. He's not really going into any situation like caring about the politics of we gotta make Marvin Jones look good so Trent Baalke doesn't feel like the moron he is for signing him to it. Like, that's not really on Doug doesn't care about that. So Marvin Jones is the weak spot. They need to get him off the field. He's killing them. If they get Marvin Jones off the field and even replace him with Treadwell, I think that's an upgrade. But Zay Jones, I think, will be useful just kind of on a occasional basis, underneath, not that much downfield, not much in the intermediate. Like, he can't play in traffic. He needs to get the space, and he can kind of get space for himself underneath, especially against off coverage. And he's got that 4.45 speed, which is kind of just fast enough to beat slow corners. but he can't run past fast corners or even average speed corners. So Evan Ingram is actually the fastest player from scrimmage in the Jaguars starting lineup. So he had the 4.42 40, whereas Kirk was a 4.47, and Zay Jones was the 4.45. ETN might be the answer in practice because he's, and not that they're throwing so far downfield specifically so much as like he can just pull away from a defense like very few players ever could.
But before we fully expound on ETN, I want to get to him and James Robinson because those are two guys on your high exposure list. Going back to Seattle for a second, Julia wants to know, with Seattle being behind very often outside of DK Metcalf, do we think that there's room for someone like a Noah Fant to maybe emerge as an option and not overtaking Tyler Lockett necessarily, but being someone that for your maybe if you're skewing tight end, second tight end, or maybe even your third with one of your last picks, does Fant have any interest to you?
Yeah, I haven't gotten too many picks of him. I think because I've usually took Albert Okwuegbunam shortly before he goes, and I often just wait on Evan Ingram, who goes a little bit later than Fant most of the time. But Fant's a totally good player. And Geno Smith is going to be better at throwing to the middle of the field and underneath than Russell Wilson was. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see the Seahawks use Fant like they basically haven't used any tight end during the entire Russell Wilson era. So, yeah, I like Fant. I don't think he can hurt you at all. I think he's one of the better value tight ends. I do wonder about the ceiling, though.
Okay. All right. So just a little bit of floor
good glue
insurance.
guy, good depth, I think.
Yeah, there you go. If nothing else, that there is that, and it's not like you're wasting anything in the top, like 14 rounds.
You won't have a Jonnu Smith season,
That was tough. I'm still smarting from that one.
Yeah, I hate them.
Now they're out getting in fights with the Panthers all the time. It's ridiculous. Has Bill Belichick lost control? Many are wondering.
Is hiring Matt Patricia and Joe Judge to run your offense as a committee a lack of institutional control? I don't know.
That's what I like to call a brain trust, man. That's just a lot of minds working, a lot of gears churning.
G7 meeting, yeah.
Pretty good. Mensa convention. I don't know. MIT. Other words. Anywho, James Robinson, Travis Etienne. Obviously, they aren't going in the same part of the draft. I scooped Etienne this morning in a best ball draft over on DraftKings. I got him late second. How much ETN do you have? And then, what's the theory on having a lot of James Robinson as well? Are you combining them with Robinson as sort of, the de facto handcuff, or is it I'm either getting ETN early in this particular draft or I'm going to wait and I'm going to grab James Robinson, once we get into the 11th, 12th round?
I have exactly 50% exposure on both ETN and James Robinson, which I'm thrilled about. Sometimes they have been on the same team, not so much lately. That was something that I do more back when people thought James Robinson was, going to get cut or something. And so, like, for instance, I got James Robinson as a running back 6 in the 18th round, the final round of one draft. I don't remember if I had ETN earlier in that one. I don't really know if I did. But when Robinson was going in the, anywhere from the 12th onward, I actually think he's not as like a handcuff logic, but because his functions are so clearly delineated from ETN's, I almost saw it as getting a running back from a different team anyway. It's like normally the handcuff is a zero-sum kind of logic, It's like this guy will be good only if the guy that I already drafted sucks. But I think ETN and Robinson all along have needed a coexisting kind of vision for the Jaguars offense to make any sense. So I see a lot of people this morning with more James Robinson good news coming in from practice. See some people on Twitter like, oof, tough news for those who took ETN. It's like, man, I've been taking them both the entire time. I don't know what you're talking about. ETN is not a 20 carry running back. If he is, he's getting hurt, and I wish I didn't take him. But if he's getting 10 carries a game, and if there's another 15 for James Robinson, that sounds great. That sounds like that's going to work. And I think Balky did it by accident, but it will work by having ETN and James Robinson on the field for the same exact reasons Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram worked. It's not unconventional. This has already been done.
And it absolutely can work. And I think both those guys are talented enough to make it work. Did you catch any of ETN in the Jaguars' most recent preseason game? The stat line was nine carries for 23 yards and then catching 1 of 3 targets for 10 yards. So obviously not explosive output, but again, it's the preseason. Not really
I
too
saw
worried.
ETN in practice and he looked good, so I don't care. I see like my really big fan, Crack Shot, wants to talk about preseason, and I don't know if this is his first time paying attention to the NFL or just forgot the last lessons of previous years. But you know what? If anyone thinks like Brian Robinson is going to take over the Washington backfield because he had a 2-yard carry on a pretty much like untouched touchdown in week one of the preseason against the Panthers. How did it work out with your Terrace Marshall props last year? How did the unders on Jamar Chase work out for you? Like preseason doesn't matter. If you're evaluating players on preseason, you've just lost. You are a confused person if you only know them from the preseason. So ETN's preseason stats don't mean anything to me. It means about as much as stats from like a joint practice or something, which those also don't matter.
Correct. They do not. They just
If his
don't.
foot looks okay, I just do not care. ETN is a star. It's not a question to me.
Yeah, I mean, with ETN, you got 4 years of incredible sample at Clemson, not doing a lot in a preseason game as the offense is getting itself together. That doesn't carry equal weight or even close to it. Doesn't carry really any weight. Let's move on over. KJ Hamler, interesting guy. Obviously, after unfortunately Tim Patrick suffered his injury, he moves theoretically into a much more prominent role. How much Hamler were you getting pre training camp starting in the Tim Patrick injury, and at the new ADP, are you still buying in bulk?
So KJ Hamler might be a lot more easily utilized in best ball for a lot of reasons. I guess just the kind of player he is. First off, the role is kind of sparse, even with Tim Patrick out of the picture. Uh, it's not clear, obviously, how Hamler is going to produce in general, and guessing ahead of time on a week-to-week basis might not be that easy either. But in best ball, and especially on underdog, where it's half point PPR instead of full point, it turns into kind of a little bit of a Marquise Brown kind of thing where he becomes more valuable than he would be in PPR because he is a big play receiver rather than a high target volume one. And he's the type of big play threat who's going to score more touchdowns than people think. Like, it would not be shocking at all to me if KJ Hamler led the Broncos in receiving touchdowns this year. Not with like 14 or something, but like someone on that team could lead them with 8 or 9 receiving touchdowns. And KJ Hamler is a totally good candidate to do that on as few as like 45 catches. So I think he is a low target volume guy. He's going to have some dud weeks. Like if that moonshot that Russell Wilson throws 2 or 3 times a game is incomplete 2 times, then he might have 1 catch for 25 yards. That kind of thing is a risk with him.
Sure.
But because he is such a high touchdown threat, I think on a per target basis, and in this being best ball, I think he's like a ideal roster glue guy in like the 13th round. I got him sometimes in like the 14th, 15th. I'm still taking him in the 13th. But the other concern with him is aside from like the low target rate, maybe in the inconsistency that comes with that, is he is coming back from a pretty big knee injury himself, and he even now is not at full speed. So we got 3 weeks before the season starts. Hamler began training camp off the PUP list, so I'm between having a full year to recover and the Broncos not putting him on the PUP list to open training camp, I am vaguely optimistic that they have some sort of rollout plan in mind for him and that he's simply going according to that plan, even though he's not practicing yet. But I would like to see him get in practice pretty soon because he is literally on 2/3 of my underdog teams.
Yeah, some encouraging practice reports would take you off tilt watch there, but I definitely am buying the theory that you're putting forward on Hamler. Really an exciting player when he's out there on the field. Let's go ahead and shift gears. So those are guys that you're able to get on half your teams, 2/3 of your teams, that sort of thing. But that's because they go later in drafts. Let's go to some more, highly valued commodities as far as their draft slot is concerned. So You have a good bit of Kyle Pitts that won't surprise anyone that's listening, but two names that also stuck out to me that I want to hear you talk a little bit more about: Saquon Barkley and CeeDee Lamb. I feel like I haven't heard. No one's really saying a whole lot about CeeDee Lamb. I think that there's been so much hemming and hawing about what they're going to do with their second receiver that we've kind of forgotten. Not that the ADP reflects it necessarily, because CeeDee Lamb is still someone that goes in the second round in most drafts. But among the top 24 players in fantasy, I feel like the just general Twitter buzz is arguably the most mum on him.
Yeah, maybe he's just such an easy evaluation that people are kind of moving on to more exotic subjects. It seems about as simple of a projection as possible. Like the target share that CeeDee Lamb is about to inherit is not often seen, and with a player of his talent, it could be a pretty explosive combination, even if the Dallas team offense more broadly kind of struggles, which I think they will. I think if they're really going to give Dalton Schultz like 8 targets a game, then they're going to punt a lot more than they realize. But even if they do, I think it sets up to have a lot of these second half scripts where Dallas is down, 9, 8, whatever 2-score count they're down, where they still have this false flicker of hope that they might catch back up, and the defense is playing prevent, and they always do that thing where they get within 4 points or 5 points, never 3 or less, and they have that last drive where they have the 4th and 7 from the 25 or whatever, and they go 3 and out, and they lose. That's something that Dallas is just elite at setting up over and over and over. And imagine those scenarios with no Cooper, no Gallup to start some amount of the season maybe, and CeeDee Lamb in his third year better than he's been in his first 2 years when he was already one of the best receivers in the league. I of course prefer Justin Jefferson probably for the yardage title, the receiving yardage title, but for the odds, CeeDee Lamb is my favorite because he's probably like 6th or 7th or something in the odds, and he's my second favorite.
That 1 second. Keep
going.
He's
my second favorite bet because he could imagine like the garbage time that this guy could have with no other viable pass catches in the offense. It's not something you see that regularly. So, I think he could have a perfect combination of just like maximum usage, both succeeding in contested situations and kind of prevent situations. I think he could really pile up numbers.
Yeah, CeeDee Lamb has the 6th highest yardage over under.
Okay, yeah, I mean, if that's receiving specifically, I really like that one because Dallas could kind of have a bummer year, and CeeDee Lamb could put up like 1,700 yards.
And you can get that at plus 1,400 over on DraftKings. That's where you'll find the best odds for that one. Justin Jefferson, unsurprisingly, leads it, but plus 800, still not a terrible.
There's a lot of ways it could go. So yeah, it's not like any solid bet exactly, but I'm very curious about it because I think people are a little under aware of Lamb and how good he is and how dependent Dallas is on him this year.
Yeah, I think I've so often lately, but by kind of virtue of where I've lucked into my draft slots, I've gotten a lot of Justin Jefferson with my first pick, so I'm usually not going receiver in my second.
I wish I could get both of them somehow. It's just impossible.
That would be the full-on electric factory, but alas, the markets are too sharp now.
Yeah, it's like CeeDee Lamb is my wide receiver 1 in practice, basically. 27.8% at a much higher price than my wide receiver 3, Christian Kirk, my wide receiver 4, KJ Hamler. Kyle Pitts is my number 1 tight end in practice, as you said, because of the equal 27.8 there. But Juju Smith-Schuster might be my sort of wide receiver 2 if we're keeping that same like price versus volume variable going. And I'm happy about that. I really like the way his season is setting up. I have him at 27.8%. And Saquon, I think I got him a couple times in like the late second a few months ago. And I still am curious to take him in the top 14 when I have picks there. So pretty happy to have him at 27.8.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in on a good bit of those guys as well. I don't have a ton of Juju just now, but I feel like I need to rectify that, especially after this discussion. And
there were a lot of
talked about the
analysts.
Chiefs offense.
There's people on Twitter and whatever posting stuff about like take Marquez Valdes-Scantling, fade Juju. Look at how much more guaranteed money Marquez Valdes-Scantling has in his contract. I really hope no one viewing or listen to those people.
Well, I'm sure that they have those tweets ready to get like self-destructed in week one, like Tom Cruise's sunglasses in Mission Impossible 2. Just watch.
Yeah, others. I mean, I hope so. Otherwise, who's it? Like Fusu's gonna start retweeting them or something. I don't know what side he is on that, but you gotta watch out in these streets.
Yeah, if you see that pop up on your Twitter notifications, something has gone horribly awry. But I think that pretty much covers everything as far as the best ball exposure for right now is concerned. We'll I'm sure before week one talk about kind of our final numbers as it goes into that. And I'm going to get a bunch more best ball in here so I can add some more exposure or my profile as well. I'm at like 5 or 6 right now, so not nearly enough. We'll get more. We'll push her well into the double digits so we can have some good back and forth on that. But enlightening stuff as always from you, Mario. That's going to do it for us here. For Mario Puig, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening to the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast, again brought to you by our friends over at Dynasty Owner.
Try Rotowire today, free for 10 days. Get our premium tools, rankings, analysis, and breaking news alerts. No credit card required. Go to rotowire.com/try.